Hello, welcome to Challenge Poverty Week. My name is Victoria Winckler and I'm Director of the Bevan Foundation, and I'm here with Steffan Evans, Policy Officer at the Bevan Foundation. All week we've been looking at what needs to be done to end poverty in Wales, and today we're looking at how changes to the Constitution might make a difference to poverty. We've been very pleased to interview a number of leading politicians on this subject, but before we go over to them, I'd just like to ask you, Steffan, why would changing the Constitution make any difference to poverty?
Well, the Constitution is clearly something that's having more debate at the moment, and it really matters when it comes to poverty and indeed any other policy area, because where powers lie determine which governments make decisions about stuff. So if you think at the moment with the current settlement, housing powers lie with the Welsh Government, and therefore Welsh Government make those decisions. But some of the other key things that cause people to live in poverty, such as social security and work, predominantly those powers lie at Westminster. So determining on how you may view the argument, that might be a good thing or a negative thing, but where those powers are determines who's making those decisions and therefore, how likely we are or not to solve poverty.
So it's really a question of who decides what. That's great. Let's turn and look at what our politicians have to say.
So the first person we spoke to was Helen Mary Jones from Plaid Cymru. And it's no surprise that Plaid Cymru are in favour of independence. And she argued that, one of the reasons that Wales should be independent was to be able to better solve poverty. And she argued that without independence, Wales wouldn't be able to get those parties in power that would be able to take actions to solve poverty in Wales.
I think they're partly come about because people have seen that historically people in Wales have never voted for a majority of Conservatives. Since ordinary working men first got the vote in the 1870s, we voted first for Liberals, then for Labour, and all the way through the 20 years of the Senate, we haven't voted for Conservative governments, and yet we keep getting them time and time again. And the argument for the UK is partly a solidarity argument, isn't it? That the richer parts of the UK should subsidise the poorer ones. Well, Wales has been in a compulsory financial union with England since 1282, and we're poorer than Slovakia was when it left the Soviet Union, comparably. So, this union isn't working well for Wales. It's not delivering. The kind of governments that we vote for are broadly centre-left and broadly in favour of social solidarity. The Conservative governments in Westminster since the 80s have not been in favour of that solidarity. You haven't had that sharing of wealth across the nations. So I think people have begun to think more in terms of independence, in terms of what we could do for ourselves and each other if we had the power to do that. So I think actually the constitutional arguments are almost coming from a perspective where people want to see parties that care about fairness, that care about social justice in power, and increasingly see that being part of the union doesn't deliver that. So I think it's really important for those of us who believe in independence to explain independence what for. I mean, there are some people in the national movement who are there for reasons around culture and language. There are some people who are there for simple constitutional reasons, and it is true that no nation ever governed another nation well. But for me particularly, and for Plaid, it's about explaining to people what we could do differently. If we controlled the benefit system in Wales, and if we'd had that control for 20 years, I don't think we'd have a third of our children living in poverty, because the governments that we've elected have wanted to do something about it, but they haven't had the power to do it. So for me, the independence discussion is about how can we have the power to do better things, and in the case of this discussion, how can we have a power not just to address poverty or challenge it, but to bring it to an end in terms of absolute poverty. And if we had the power here to do it, I believe we would elect governments that would.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer. And that links in quite closely, really, with the second question I was going to ask you is, Plaid Cymru is a party that's in favour of independence. So I was going to ask, why do you think this would be best for solving poverty?
Well, because we would have this would be best for solving poverty because we'd have the levers in our own hands. With the current devolution settlement, really all the Welsh Government can do is to manage poverty, because the levers are not there. Now, I don't understand why our current Labour-led government hasn't asked for the same control over benefits as Scotland has got. Don't understand that. That's a question for them. And a Plaid Cymru government would demand that straight away. And we would use that control then, for example, to pay the families of children in poverty £35 a week each for each child. And I believe that we could build a consensus in Wales around that. It's difficult to do, though, when you haven't got the power, and particularly when you haven't got the power to borrow, to invest. Independence is important for tackling poverty because historically the Welsh people have voted for people who want to bring poverty to an end, but they haven't had the power to do it. And to me, that's just a nonsense. And it's back to this question about the solidarity of the union, which is what the Labour Party has based its message on, that the richer parts of the UK should subsidise the poorer. Well, that hasn't happened really since the 1980s. And if we want to end poverty in our country, we've got to have the power to do it. And we're not going to have that power unless we take it into our own hands as an independent nation.
Linked to that, though, we also spoke to David Melding, who's from the Welsh Conservatives, who's obviously quite a prominent thinker on the Constitution. And he argued, actually, the Constitution might not be the most important thing around what solves poverty, but rather political culture and the political environment. And he argues that, if we're really serious about solving poverty, there's nothing stopping us getting to grips with that at the moment by working together across different parts of the UK.
I would just qualify what I'm going to say and urge a bit of caution on those that feel the Constitution is a primary question here, because I mean, it is for those that want to see, a stable governmental system and national issues properly represented and cultural matters and these things. But there isn't a great body of evidence that says you get more equality and more effective distribution then and flatter distribution of incomes in decentralized as opposed to centralized systems of government. But Scandinavian countries are fairly centralized in their approach. The classical argument for federalism was that with more local decision making, you get more efficiency on these issues and more responsive policies. But that doesn't always happen either. So I think it's much more your political culture and what people really value. Now, after the Second World War, people were so determined to create a fairer society that I don't think it would have mattered what constitutional structure we had, federal or, as we did have then, quite a tight unitary state. It was just that people had made this political decision that created a new consensus. It was pushed forward by the Labour Party, but then, not fundamentally altered at all by Conservative governments until at least the 1980s. They administered things a little differently, and they, perhaps emphasised in that mix the importance of, enterprise and these sorts of things. But, promoting enterprise is not inimical to promoting equality. Social firms and social enterprises are a good example of that. So I just think you need to be a bit cautious in saying, the Constitution, if you don't get that right, you can't get these very important economic questions. The biggest thing we face in society in terms of our material life is that between equality and efficiency, and they're not polar opposites, but they do pull in different directions to some extent. There's a sweet spot, I think, which many of us feel we're not finding at the moment, but that's more of the debate than where does power rest in life.
And then the final person we spoke to was Carwyn Jones, who's obviously former First Minister and from Welsh Labour. He's someone who's spoken a lot about the Constitution recently, and he outlined why he thinks remaining as part of the Reformed Union would be the most effective mechanism for Wales to solve poverty.
Now, I'm not somebody who's in favour of independence, nor am I somebody who's in favour of the status quo. What I'd like to see is a more equal partnership of nations within the UK. But in terms of poverty, a better system of ensuring that money is distributed to where it's most needed. The UK is at its heart a fiscal and monetary union. Money goes to where it's needed, but that's been eroded over the past few years. The Barnett formula, we know from a Welsh perspective, is no longer fit for purpose, and we've seen money, for example, going to Northern Ireland, which should have attracted extra money for Wales, but didn't. So the system is broken, and that means that Wales doesn't attract the share of money that it should. But also we have to raise our sights. We don't want to be a country that is forever looking for subsidies because we have problems with poverty. We want to make sure that we give our people better skills, because we know better skills lead to better paid jobs. And we need to make sure that we do that by having, first of all, the skills provision for people, but secondly, promoting ourselves strongly around the world, saying to people, Wales is a good place to come to invest. We don't want you really if you're going to pay nothing to people. That's the way it was done in the 80s and 90s. We want to bring you to Wales because we've got great people who've got great skills, and that will put more money in people's pockets. And that ultimately is key to dealing with poverty.
Yeah, excellent. And that leads on to the second question, really, is that you talked there about, not being in favour of independence over status quo. So what sort of system would you like to see kind of going forward? And why do you think that system would be best for solving poverty?
Well, I would call it home rule. And what do I mean by that? Well, the four nations of the UK voluntarily become part of, perhaps not a union so much, but a confederation. You have four parliaments, and you also have a federal parliament in London that deals with those issues that everyone agrees should be dealt with at that level. For example, defence, border control and immigration, the fiscal and monetary union itself. Now, I don't see that this leads to problems as long as you define very specifically who does what. Nor is it particularly radical, because this is very similar to the system they have in Canada, where sovereignty is pooled and the system doesn't operate on one parliament is supreme over the others, but everybody has a different role. Just as governments operate in the UK, there's no hierarchy of governments in the UK. Why not then parliaments? I think that would give us far more sustainability. I think that would give us a way of recognising people's strongly held identities without seeing the UK break up into different independent countries, which inevitably is going to lead to a number of questions that don't have the answers at the moment. So for me, I think it's a question of the UK becoming a true partnership with a true sense of the wealthy areas helping out the poorer areas. That's at the heart of European funding in order for poorer areas to prosper in the future. And that, I think, is something that most people in the UK would sign up to.
We've heard from three politicians with three quite different views. We know that the Constitution is not going to go away as a topic for discussion. We also know that poverty is still very high in Wales and is set to rise. If you'd like to join with us to help us to end poverty in Wales, please visit our website at www.bevanfoundation.org. Thank you very much.